So, welcome to the Pool of Life podcast, episode 2, with me, Neil Meekin of the Pool of Life. So, today I am privileged and honored to have an amazing person, Sonia Ponzo from Outset Wellness, joining me here today. And Sonia is the founder and CEO of Outset Wellness, an ADHD-friendly platform for people who want to stay active but struggle to make exercise fit into their chaotic lives. But Sonia is so much more than that. And I've got to know Sonia through an innovation entrepreneurship program that we're both part of, a community called the Accelerator. And from the get-go, Sonia made a really strong impression on me, not just because of how amazing she is as a human being, amazing intellect, but also just a strong passion, but also just to feel like there's a connection between us in terms of the way that like we both see the world in a very similar way. And the conversations we have, they just flow and grow and expand and go in all kinds of different directions. And so I really value that in a human being. And it's quite rare for me to be able to have conversations on that level. And so it's a real privilege for me to be able to have you on the podcast, given how many podcasts you've been doing lately and how much interest there is in your work. So I'll say no more than that, and I'll hand over to you and introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. And I mean, right back at you, it's been really good meeting you and being able to, explore similarities and a lot of viewpoints that you're right, are actually quite aligned. And I think, it's not every day that you meet people that you feel so attuned, so it's quite great.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's the feeling and the sentiments reciprocated. But it's amazing to have you on because one of the things that really resonated strongly with me, and it's a real theme like in my sort of professional life, not just professional, but like even in partnership and I would say in friends, especially in the entrepreneurship community, is the prevalence of people who identify with being diagnosed with ADHD and autism. It's prevalent. So there's a lot of people who come also to me constellations workshops who identify as ADHD. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. But like I'm keen to hear more about like who you are, like where you're from, like your bit of your story and how you find yourself here now, where you're at Outset Wellness and like some of the work that you've been doing and a bit of your why. So yeah, over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, and please give me half-time adjustments and nudges if I waffle too
You
much.
go, you go, you go.
Um, I'm Italian originally from a city called Turin that is up north in the Alps. And I moved to the UK about 10 years ago. And a lot of my childhood was very much marked by financial instability. My family never had stable financial income. And when my parents split up when I was 7 years old, my mom and I went to live with my grandparents, and we were sharing a bunk bed in one of the rooms of the two-bedroom apartment they had.
Wow.
And until I was 14, I never really even had my own bed by myself. And when my mom and I moved out, we moved to a one-bedroom apartment, and I had the sofa bed, and that was, the closest that I could get to a space that was my own, but it wasn't really. So I think for me, it was always very part of my everyday life, the idea of needing to carve that space out for myself, physically first and mentally later. And my mom and my grandma, they're both, it's a very matriarchal family that I'm part with, and
Mhm.
surprising. And both my mom and my grandma, they were both very much into instilling in me the idea that studying, education, and reading were my tickets out of where we were, our current situation. And so even though I'm currently in the process of being diagnosed for ADHD, I'm just waiting for my final appointment. I've been referred to the GP, did all the questionnaires and all of that. But ADHD didn't affect my early life the same way that it affects a lot of other people. So academically, I never had a problem because my mom and my grandma made a point of, first of all, making education fun and trying to mold it around me rather than trying to make me fit into normal educational standards. To give you an example, when I was a kid, I never slept, like never. And my mom took me to the hospital at some point when I was 2, 3 years old. And she said, I don't know what to do. She doesn't sleep. Like she literally doesn't sleep. And they did a bunch of tests and all of that. And obviously it was Italy in the 90s. So the idea of ADHD was not really something common. It still probably isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
So the doctors concluded after, EEG and RI and whatnot, they're like, yeah, she's hyperactive. Let her run around. At some point she'll tire out. And my mom was like, I haven't slept in a month. What do you recommend I do before I collapse? And they're like, eh. So, she needed to be really creative as to how to keep me entertained. And even when I was in nursery or like before primary school, kids used to sleep during the day. They used to make them sleep. And I would just refuse because I couldn't sleep. I would just be there in bed with my eyes open and, making mess. And so the teachers basically had to devise a little club for me with activities that I would be able to perform in silence while everybody else was sleeping. And so by the time I got to primary school, I already knew how to read, how to write. I already knew how to do most of the things that they teach the first year of primary school. And so that year, I basically just spent it reading books in a corner while the other kids were learning how to read and how to write and to do basic arithmetics, because all of that my grandma, my mom, and my teachers in nursery taught me to do. And so I think that start kind of shaped the rest of my academic life. I went on to high school where, my sense of justice, that is very much part of the ADHD personality, came up pretty much in different forms. When I was a bit younger, it was more like around environment. I remember that when I was in primary school, I would do this thing with a couple of other kids where we would go into the bins after food, after lunch, and we would do like the recycling versus the general waste, and we would split things up like with big
Oh.
gloves, go there and split things up. And that was my activity after lunch every day. And in high school, it became more about politics. I was the student representative in year four, and which is basically fourth year of high school. In Italy, we have 5 years of high school, and they finish around 18 years old. So when I was 17, I was, a political representative, and it was very much part of my personality to always be fighting everybody else's battles and to always, get things very much at heart. And my mom used to always say, "Put the cross down, you're not Jesus," which I think reflects it really well.
Wow.
And during high school, my mom suggested, the teachers of my secondary school suggested that I do classical studies. So in Italy, when you go after secondary school, you have different types of high school. You can do more professional services and more kind of like academic schools that prepare you for university. And you have either the science side or the classical study side. And classical studies basically is things like philosophy, Latin, Greek, that kind of stuff. And the teachers were like, this will prepare her for university, so put her there. She'll go to university for sure. So let her do that because it will form her mind and will teach her how to study. And they were right. I mean, I don't know what use I could have right now for translating from ancient Greek, but it is true that it gives you a certain forma mentis. And after that, I went into psychology. So I wanted to be a doctor at the beginning. It was back then when Scrubs was super famous and, all your various ER and all of those. So I was taken a little bit by the idea of being a doctor. Luckily, it didn't work out. So I went into psychology instead. I did my BSc and my MSc so since I was 16, I was kind of working on the side. So first during high school, I was doing mainly summers and like evenings every now and then. And then during university, I was always working at least part-time to sustain myself for studies. The thing about Italy that is really good is that if you're a good student, they sponsor you for university. So if you're a good student and poor, they sponsor you for university. So I actually never paid fees for university.
And so your academic journey in terms of like doing your undergrad, your bachelor's, then doing your master's and your PhD, did you do it all in the University of Torino, or where did you do your academic studies?
Yeah, so I did master's and bachelor's in Turin, University of Turin, and then my PhD was here in the UK. It was a joint lab between UCL and University of Hertfordshire in Hatfield.
Ah, okay, okay. Interesting. Now, something I want to go back to something because
Yeah.
sometimes when I do when I do an interview, there's certain words that jump out, like neon flashing light, and something that you mentioned, and I won't when we go into it now because there's a bit of a flow, but I'll come back to it. is you said something around a sense of justice in relation to people with ADHD. Now that just jumped out at me, so I've made a note of it, and
Yeah.
I'll see how it continues to unfold. And if we get towards the end, I'm going to bring you back to it and discuss it because it seems to be a bit of a key theme, but by the
Yeah.
sound of things as a particular trait. So I'm interested in learning more about that. Well, tell us about like your master's and your PhD in psychology, like because I mean, is there a correlation to that and to Outset? Like, give us a bit of an understanding about what that looks like, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wouldn't have said yes until very recently. I think in a way there was a moment a few months ago where I looked back at everything that happened and everything I studied and everything I did, and it all clicked together. But it wouldn't look like it if you look at it in a chronological. It's kind of like watching, what is it, Memento, when you watch it the right way or the wrong
Yeah.
way. It's kind of a similar thing. But basically, my bachelor and my master's were very much about neuropsychology, especially my master's. So basically, neuropsychology is the study of when things go wrong in the brain and your cognitive functions are not neurotypical, but not in a neurodivergent versus neurotypical way, more in a, there is a damage of some form to your brain that makes your cognition different than that of someone who doesn't have that kind of damage. So think things like aphasia, when the left side of your frontal lobe is damaged and you cannot speak, things like that. And right after my master's, I worked in a center for rehabilitation for traumatic brain injury for about a year. And I was doing both clinical work and research work there. And in a way, I always wanted to be a clinician. So I always wanted to do clinical psychology in hospitals. So I wanted to work in neurology department in hospitals as a neuropsychologist. And because I did like an internship back then in a hospital where there was this neuropsychologist who was doing a lot of very cool stuff. He was doing surgery with neurosurgeons to test cognitive functions in real time during surgery, which was super cool. It was really a lot of work of assessment and rehabilitation, which I really liked. But then that year there was just, I realized that it wasn't for me. I think a couple of things contributed to that. Obviously, the work environment in Italy is not the same as here, I must say.
I understand. I've spent a lot of time in Italy, so I understand the culture and the situation there. Yeah.
Very hierarchical, very ego driven in all possible respects, and that makes things really difficult. Especially if you're someone who wants to do stuff and wants to have impact and has that urge to change things. Italy is very resistant to change in both enterprise and, public spaces,
Hmm.
which obviously makes it very difficult to live in for a person like me. And then the other point was, unfortunately, when it comes to certain types of damage, brain damage, there isn't an awful lot that you can do, especially after it's a chronic damage. So if you have someone who has had, a traumatic brain injury 7 years prior, and they still need support to an extent, it becomes much more about keeping the function where it is today rather than improving it, which in a way, after a while, felt like I wasn't doing much. I wasn't doing enough. It felt like, okay, this is kind of compensatory care. It doesn't solve the problem. How can I go and solve the problem? Which is why I then went into research. The idea was to kind of go back to the root of research around consciousness and embodiment and embodied cognition and try to figure out what things are crucial to awareness and self-awareness so that then we can potentially have preventative tools or we can build programs that are based on a bigger body of knowledge rather than just trying to get this one individual to go from A to B, if that makes sense.
I'm going to ask you something because obviously with you being with your academic background, because in certain circles that I'm aware of that that I'm in actively, but I'm aware of certain language that gets used. There's a word that gets used all the time, and I'm not fully sure where people are coming from. So I'd love for you to name it for me, from an academic perspective. Embodiment, like what does embodiment mean, rather than my perception of the word. What is the meaning of embodiment? Like what does it mean in this context?
That's a good question. And I think you would probably hear different things from different people according to the flavor
Of
of it.
course.
But I think the way that I would describe it is embodied cognition is basically this concept where your thoughts processes, your cognition is dependent on the fact that you have a body. And the body is the first medium of interaction between you and the world. Perception starts with the body. I don't know if you remember that experiment. It was, I think, the 70s, and I think it was Hilary Putnam that was talking about putting brains in bats and connecting them to a sort of simulation where the body is not there, but your brain is in a simulation, and that should suffice to recreate consciousness. It was kind of like a paradoxical, it was to show that it's not possible. But it's kind of what I mean. We are not brains in bats. We are not brains attached to a surrounding. The body is part of the cognition. The body is part of perception, and the body is the first barrier between us and the world. But also there is an awful lot that goes on within our body in terms of our own self-perception and what we refer to as interoception, which is the sense of the state of your own body at any given moment in time. Think things like thirst, hunger, sex drive, needing to go to the loo, all of that refers to interoception. It's very visceral. And all of this contributes to the sense of self that you have of yourself. Because obviously, if you think about yourself as someone who doesn't drink enough, and that is very common in ADHD, or doesn't eat enough, or doesn't, it's not that they don't drink enough or don't eat enough, it's that they don't get the signal that says, hey, you need to drink, hey, you need to eat. That signal is all over the place. But the problem is that when that happens, it might seem like a minor thing. What does it do to your body if you don't drink enough? But what it actually does is there is a cascade of effects after that, which means you're going to be dehydrated, you're going to be hungry if you haven't eaten enough, but also over time, you will stop trusting that your body is able to tell you what you need. The more you can't understand what it wants from you, what it's asking of you, the more likely it is that you will start to slowly disconnect, which is something that we see a lot in ADHD, and which is really something that is at the core of what we do at Outset. The idea that, exercise is not a way to just keep your body healthy. It's also a way to reconnect with the fundamentals of your body, feeling it in space, feeling your heart rate, feeling your breathing, feeling your muscles, and learning what that means and stress testing your boundaries.
Well, this is took a bit of a profound turn, um, in the sense that, like, again, a lot of the people who are around my pool of life community, I mean, and I know this is a big part of my own work, and then I'll link this to say trauma, for example, where we talk about ADHD, which is going to be the focus for the conversation and Outset, but I want to touch on it a little bit where, like you say, the lack of trust that's perpetuated through this chronic mistrust of the body, where the signals aren't being able to be read. Like, I mean, the other language is being used, but it's like it is coming back to reconnecting back into and trusting the bodily sensations. And I don't know what your view on this, but like it's like the Western industrial system and society, I mean, which I believe is inherently traumatized, means that people don't feel safe enough to go back into the body. Now, that's my interpretation of my and other personal experiences around the work that I do. But should you touch on that a little bit before we move on? Because
Yeah.
yeah, because that connection to the body is huge. Because like somatic work is becoming really popular now as people are seeking to come back into that connection with the body and moving beyond and healing trauma. So over to you. It's a big one.
Oh, I have a lot to say about this. One thing I would preface this with is it's not just ADHD, burnout, chronic stress, an awful lot of other mental health manifestations definitely have an underlying interoceptive issue. It might manifest in slightly different ways, and the mechanism around it are slightly different. But in all these cases, what happens is the same thing, which is my body is not a trustworthy source of information, and I cannot go there for whatever reason. But now back to why that's the case, I think you raised a really interesting point. And I think, if we look at our society, it is a society that primarily relies on external scaffolding. And most importantly, it doesn't really allow space to the body. Think about, our normal day at work. If you think about the typical office day, office work day, you start at 9, you finish at 5, 6, start at 9. If you're lucky, finish at 5 or 6 if you're lucky. there's no moment within the day where you have enough allocated time to eat. Most of us eat in front of the computer.
Yeah.
Enough time to actually take a break. There's no thing like, okay, every hour we have a 10, 15 minutes break. Walking meetings, all of these things that are slowly coming up a little bit now in cultures, in like those quirky startups that do things like walk and talks and whatnot. But it is not, and I love those. I'm not saying anything
Me
against
too.
it. I
Yeah.
do them all the time. And the only reason I'm not standing up today during this talk is because I wanted to avoid too much moving of the camera. Otherwise, I typically move up and down, and thinking for me is equating to moving.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's very common for a lot of ADHDers. But I think the point is that we don't build our lives around the body. We force the body to be built around a life that doesn't necessarily respect its needs.
Yeah, that's landed with me very cleanly. I understand. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The form doesn't fit the context.
Yeah. And I think the problem is that the thing that upsets me a bit is that we think that it would take so much to get us where we need to be, but I don't think that that's true. There is a lot of half-time adjustments that we can, practice fairly easily if we get a little bit out of our current ways of thinking that will be a dramatic improvement. Think, for instance, the 4-day week. It was an absolute heresy a few years ago. And then COVID arrived and it showed us that remote work works, that we can be more productive in 4 days than five. And now we're slowly changing our ways. It's the same thing. There is like a system that resists big changes because it is afraid of losing control. But in
Mhm.
reality, more of these changes will allow it to have better control because if you have better employees that are tuned in into what they need, everything will work better.
But productivity improves, no? Growth
Everything
improves,
improves.
connection improves. Yeah, it's all there.
And even if we don't want to make it a productivity point, I think there is definitely a human point that, if you have a workforce that is running on fumes, they will eventually burn out and you will actually pay in other ways.
100%. I mean, I've experienced it. I mean, respectively, our work. I've worked in startups and I've supported startups, and it's quite prevalent. But I've also worked in government as well in New Zealand, and that was of that ilk, and like there was just burnout everywhere. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying everyone's got ADHD, but like there was just burnout everywhere because the systems that we were operating in just weren't conducive to it being a healthy environment. So I suppose then let me just get on to that then. So ADHD. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then let's then move into Outset because I'm really excited to hear about like the story around Outset and how that was developed. But just to sort of give a framing, because it is connected to ADHD, attention hyperdeficit disorder,
Hyperactivity deficit.
hyperactivity deficit
Eh,
disorder. It's,
uh,
it's it's on the tip of a lot of people's tongues, and it's like it's almost become almost like a thing. And so like what is it? What is ADHD and why has it become so prevalent now? Like, is there something changed with the DSM like manual? Like, what's changed? Because it seems to be everywhere.
So I think obviously it's a spectrum. So no, no ADHD is necessarily the same as the next. And you have different types of ADHD. So you have a more inattentive type where it looks like there's more difficulty in focusing, there's more difficulty in getting out of your head, there's more difficulty in getting started. And then you have the more hyperactive type where the problems is staying still, the problem is relaxing, the
Hmm.
problem is being able to get out of the feeling like you're run by an engine, as they ask in one of the ADHD screeners. And then you have the combined type, which is obviously the best of both worlds. And most people, especially women who are diagnosed later in life, they tend to be of the combined type. They tend to have elements of both. And it feels, at least I remember from my personal experience, I definitely started on the hyperactive side, which is not particularly common for girls. Typically, in girls and women, it shows up more as an inattentive type by definition. But for me, it was completely opposite. It was very much hyperactive. And then with growing up, there were elements of inattentive that were put on top.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that you would find if you read on it is that it's defined as an attention deficit. So it's very much cognitive.
Hmm.
not much is talked in terms of, it's talked about in terms of the other repercussions that ADHD has, especially what we were talking about. So all of the fact that when it comes to ADHD, there is typically a lack of ability of interpreting signals coming from your own body, but also a lot of sensory issues. So, for instance, ADHDers tend to have terrible proprioception, which is a sense of where your body is in space. If you
Mm,
look at my legs, they are completely covered in bruises because I do not see objects. I bump into furniture constantly. And this is something that is very common. Interestingly, it doesn't happen during exercise, at least not to me. So when I am exercising, I'm actually much, much better at not hurting myself
mm.
than when I'm not. And I think it has something to do with the fact that being in motion sets up different processes in terms of attention. So your attention is focused on your being in motion, so you are focused on your body. Whereas typically, if you move around the house, your ADHD brain is focused on anything and everything apart from what you're doing. I think there's like there was a great analogy of someone I've met recently. She said that her ADHD brain felt like an airport. So you have a lot of people running around. Every different shop has its own music. Every now and then a plane crashes. Most of the planes are delayed, but sometimes things work. And I think that is a very good way of putting it.
When you share that with me, the first thing that comes to mind, which is possibly also an ADHD trait, which you could probably validate for me, is overwhelm.
Yeah, yeah.
Sensory overwhelm, cognitive overwhelm, just
Yeah.
whoa, just too much. Yeah, yeah, come on, yeah. Wow.
Also why, ADHD is, and I didn't really, so my realization of having ADHD, despite people telling me and, science being there since I was a little child, I didn't really realize it until fairly recently when I looked back at everything I built, Outset, and I'll tell you in a minute about that. But the Outset story is a story of a product that wasn't born as an ADHD product. The product was born, and then I realized I built an ADHD product when I realized I have ADHD, and I built it to help me as the first user to overcome my issues with exercise.
Quick one,
But
quick one.
yeah,
How was it? I mean, I know you're still waiting for the diagnosis to come through, but as a psychologist yourself, you're probably
yeah,
confident that like you're displaying the symptoms. How was it for you to realize that it's highly likely that I've got ADHD, and when you've reflected back like on your life, how was that for you on a feeling level and a mental level? Like what's it done for you?
it was very emotional, especially I think the most encapsulating moment was when they sent through the questionnaires. So
Mm,
when you do the referral and you refer to a service, in this case it was right to choose service, they send you a bunch of questionnaires to complete. And there is one that you have to complete with your mother or your parent, someone that knew you when you were a child, and one that you have to complete with your partner. And I think that was the moment that broke me a little bit because seeing Nick going through yes, example, there was something like 25 questions, and they were basically yes or no questions asking, does she often forget things? Can you provide an example? And he was like, oh, and he went like flew through all of them with like five examples for each. And then I realized, oh shit, I'm a handful. Like, it's a lot for someone to live with all of this. And how did I live with all of this time without going crazy? No, no wonder that things are difficult. So yeah,
I can imagine it was quite emotional.
yeah, it was. It was.
Would
I
you?
think my mom, if anything, my mom was basically trying to defend me against the questionnaires.
Mm.
Questionnaires were asking questions like, did she have this? Or did she have that? Was she doing this? Like, no, she was great. The point is not the thing, which was
To be
something
biased, yeah, yeah.
very sweet.
Oh, wow. So, like you say, you built Outset, not necessarily as an ADHD platform. There was an intention there. There's been a catalyst. You've invested time and money, and obviously your life partner, Nick, is your business partner.
Yeah.
Like, just touch on why you started Outset, and then just then evolve it into like how it's become now ADHD. And the one point I'll make is because I've seen you posting about Outset on LinkedIn, which is obviously a business social media platform. And I noticed that, okay, I'd follow your post and I'd support you because we are obviously from the same community and want to support your work. But then I noticed the shift towards ADHD, and all of a sudden, something in me really resonated strongly.
Yeah.
And then the interest in what you were doing just really ramped up very quickly. So
Yeah.
tell me about Outset and tell me what it is now, but what it was before, and give a little bit of the story about this product of yours.
Let me just start with the last thing you said because I will forget
Okay.
otherwise. But I think that is a very important point. And when you build a product, sometimes you start with an idea and you think that's what you're building, and then you realize what you have built. And the moment that you do a lifetime adjustment and figure that out, and then you're like, oh, but these are my people, that's who it is for, that's when things start falling into place. And my only regret is not having realized this before, but I don't think I could have. The way that it went basically was a few years ago when I was working in tech. So after my PhD, this is a bit of a story is missing. After my PhD, I started working in a startup in industry straight away, mainly because academia was too slow for me and I just couldn't cope with the pace, understandably. And what happened after is I spent about 7 years, 6, 7 years in the startup world. I worked in different startups, mainly mental health, with a little detour into women's health when I was director of science at Flow, and then ADHD and autism when I was VP of science at Helios. So I worked mainly in science capacity, science and product capacity. And what I was doing was evaluating effectiveness of the products, doing more research into the topics of the different companies, and managing and expanding the teams, the science and research teams. But there was always in me this idea that I needed to achieve, I needed to do, and I needed to show God knows who that I made it and I was doing very well. And despite everything that happened to my life, I still managed to become director of this or whatever of that. And being on that hamster wheel, as much as like looking back at it now, I have kind of like a little bit of sympathy. I mean, there is a little bit of like, what the hell were you doing, woman? That's not what matters. But there is also like a little bit of a kindness and like you needed to go through that to understand what really matters.
Of course, yeah, yeah. Makes sense.
And whilst I was, on the hamster wheel and chasing, roles and names and titles and career, I burnt out, obviously, because it was just too much of everything, too fast. If you look at my CV, I hopped companies fairly quickly, not because I, couldn't stay in the job, but because I tend to get bored easily. Once I solve all the difficult stuff, I come in, the difficult stuff is done. Now it's just maintenance. What's next? So that's, how it felt. And that's why I kept moving very quickly through the career ladder. And that's why I could get promotions every time because I would change jobs and I would go up a level. And that burnt me out completely because I was also, running on fumes for the past decade at that point. And I realized that exercise was one of the best ways for me to maintain my sanity. I could not afford a sabbatical. I could not afford to take time off because of financial constraints. And so I needed to keep going one way or another. As much as that's not what you should be doing, I didn't have a choice. And so I had to find a way to pull through, to push through, and that way was exercise. But I also fully realized that I just couldn't stay consistent with it. Like, but no matter how much I realized how important it was and how much I wanted to make space for it, my brain just seemed to have other ideas. So I would go in front of a calendar, try to plan for it, and then something would happen, and then the plan would go out of the window, and then I would look out of the window, and it was raining when I thought I was going out, and my motivation would go down, and then I would always find excuses and ways not to do what I planned to do, and then I would feel horrible about myself because then it's that shame of like that cycle of like shame and guilt, and I'm not even able to do the things that I said that I wanted to do that I know are healthy and I know are good for me. And that's when with Nick we started talking about Outset as the very initial prototype, a little algorithm that would take into account a bunch of stuff, your workday, the weather forecast, your calendar, so see your availability, as well as other million things. So the way that we built that algorithm was we would build a version, then I would test it, go back to the rest of the team and say, no, this doesn't work because this, that. And we did that for 6 months until the algorithm started giving me recommendations that I found good enough. And that's not how you should build products, by the way, for anybody listening. No, MVP, ship, but that's how we did it. Because I was very much a control freak in that sense. I wanted the experience to be magical and perfect. And That was how it was built at the very beginning, very bare bones, very, minimal. And then after a while, we realized that for a lot of people, there was no appeal to that. They were like, yeah, it's a nice thing, but I can just put it there myself. First of all, they don't. That's the lie that people tell themselves. But I can just put it there myself. Yeah, you don't. And the first time something happens, it will skip. Because the point of the Outset algorithm is that it will change according to what happens to your day. So not only will plan activities for you, whatever you tell it to do, walk, cycle, whatever, it looks at when it's best to send you outside and when it's best to keep you inside. And it will plan, for instance, a walk today at 4 p.m. because it's sunny, a home workout in 2 days because it's raining, so on and so forth. But it will also keep changing according to the weather and to what happens to your calendar. So if your schedule changes and someone puts a meeting here at a certain time where you had an activity, it will get rescheduled.
Wow.
So the point is about adaptive behavior and adaptive learning. And the more you interact with the algorithm and with the
Yeah, yeah.
product, the better it will be at recommending things that make sense to you.
Ah, okay.
And that's what it was at the very beginning. And then we kept, working with our community, working with the people who were trying it, and we weren't finding like the right reception. It was just a bit, yeah, it's a cool idea, but it just doesn't click with me. And then one day I started thinking, and I was talking to my ex-boss, and he was like, yeah, you definitely have ADHD. I'm like, oh, do I? Oh, interesting. And I started reading on it. And I don't know why I decided to do it then, because he's been saying it to me for ages.
Yeah.
And and I started reading into it. And then I went back to my research, so my dissertation. And my PhD dissertation was all around interoception, bodily perception, and how you integrate different sensory modalities, vision, vestibular, all of that, into a sense of self, right? And I looked at that, and then I looked at what we built. And I'll tell you a bit more about how the product is today, because that was kind of bare bones. I look at what we built, I look at my research, I'm like, oh, but this is good. Like there is a link here. The point is to bring you back to the body. And then I read more into ADHD and I read more into interoception disruption in ADHD. And I'm like, oh, right, this makes even more sense because exercise is actually a Trojan horse to help people with ADHD show them how the body should feel like in certain situations, reflect on it, and
Wow.
use this new information to predict how the body should feel in other situations, cascading effect, but also give them that reinforcement that they can do the things that they plan to do. The idea around Outset is that I will put an activity for you in the moment when you're most likely to follow through with it, and that will show you that you can do it. Your ADHD is a barrier, but you can do it.
Mm. Sorry, I interrupted you there. So it's like a reinforcing behavior. Yeah, yeah. So it's like you say, it's that training, bringing that connection back. I can to it, building that confidence. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to just make sure that I was
Yeah.
understanding you clearly. Well, how fascinating that is about how like I'm almost wondering whether unconsciously you were building something that was leading you towards that, where there was maybe a blind spot that it just needed to get to a certain point, and then there was a correlation made because it's too uncanny for it to be correlated. Does that make sense? Because obviously you're seeing the world through your own inner blueprint of how your brain works and your experience and your education and everything. So it's really interesting how that's hit a intersection. Your research and the platform, even though you intended it to be something different originally.
Yeah, and I think, the funnier thing is even that if you look at the different things that we built into Outset, so there is obviously the calendar and the algorithm that plans things. That is pretty much the antidote to decision fatigue. So it's this concept in ADHD world and neurodiversity world where you're just there with too many variables and too many things that you need to take into account and you can't make a decision. And by the end of the day, you haven't done anything. You have thought a lot about when you were supposed to go work out, but nothing happened. And so this one and time blindness. So the fact that the day just gets away from you and
Mm.
oh, all of a sudden it's 9 p.m. and I haven't done any of the things I needed to do. And so these two concepts are very much counteracted by the nature of the algorithm, which basically finds the moment that is most likely to be successful and sends you out. And then we have the whole component of gamification. So every time you move with the app, a little plant grows, and then when you finish growing that plant, it's added to your garden, and you keep growing your garden. And that's very much one of and then we've been told this by a lot of our ADHD users, that's very much tapping into the reward system that works really well for ADHD, whereby you have a visual progress of what you're doing and how you're doing. So your growth is not just tied to I've done the thing, that's it, but there's something visual that grows with you. But also it's not tied to metrics and performance, which because in ADHD specifically, and I did this because it happened, I know this because it happened to me, it's easy to get obsessed and it's easy to get injured. So the more you get obsessed with numbers, the more you think, oh, I need to run faster, I need to run, further away. The more you do that, the more you risk to get injured and then never come back to exercise. And the problem is that a lot of other apps out there encourage you to do that. So they encourage streaks, they encourage, performative behavior, they encourage competition, but that feeds a certain part of the ADHD that might not be necessarily the best. I know a lot of people thrive on healthy competition, but the problem with ADHD is that getting from healthy to unhealthy is just one tiny step.
Okay.
And then there is the last concept, which is again pretty much ADHD, which is body doubling. So in the app, you can invite friends and match workout times with them. And we also have a community where different people come together, they share tips and experiences. And this is very much the same as the concept of body doubling, where doing something with someone else makes you more likely to actually follow through for accountability purposes.
There's almost like tacit accountability there, isn't it? Where there's a motivation and obviously the support as well. I suppose another part of it, I mean, a question is like, where was, because you mentioned about this different, the spectrum and how people would come into Outset as an entry point. But just before I ask that question, I imagine people are coming into the platform who it's quite new to them about ADHD and these symptoms that they're exhibiting, but finally being seen by someone else who's in a similar boat where they spend their whole life like feeling completely isolated because I'm different and I don't really know why, and all of a sudden I'm being seen. Because you touched on something before about like maybe you talked about the time blindness and then getting to the end of the day because there's a lot of, I imagine, shame and guilt around
Yeah,
some of these symptoms that get exhibited that can be quite corrosive.
yeah. I
So
think,
wait, go on, you go,
no, no, sorry.
you go.
I think that that is one of the biggest points, and it's one of the biggest points of pride for me because people tell us all the time that one thing they love about the platform is that it's not shouty and it's not guilt tripping. Like you come in, you miss a day, and all you see is, hey, what didn't work? Just so we can work with it together. We can work on it together. And then there's always tomorrow. Don't worry. Like there is nothing in the app that pushes you to the Duolingo style thing where if you miss a day, Duolingo starts crying and then it dies and all of that. So it's not about that. It's not about reinforcing guilt and shame. It's about actually empowering you to make you feel like you are a self-efficacious agent in the world and you can do the things you want to do. Is to give you a helping hand to actually show you how good you already are.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave you now into the question. How do people identify as I am definitely a user of this application called Outset Wellness? What's that entry point if for people who are listening or people who are watching, if they were interested, like what's the entry point for them? How like okay, I definitely need this app apart from the things you've talked about. Give me a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think, there is obviously a point where it's easier to describe things with certain types of words because they resonate much more easily. So obviously we are defined and we define our platform as an ADHD-friendly platform because it is the population that serves best, but it doesn't mean that you can only access it if you have a diagnosis. It doesn't mean that if you're neurotypical but struggle with executive function or decision fatigue or motivation, you can't use it. That's definitely something that depends a lot on how what you value as a user from the perspective of what a product is, what you're looking for in a product. If these are the things that speak to you, the fact that you are in a very understanding environment full of people who are just there to improve themselves and live healthier and be happier, where obviously exercise is not seen from the lens of performing and lifting and running faster, but it's seen from the lens of functioning day to day, focusing, feeling better, feeling more in tune with yourself, feeling like you're showing up better today than the day before because you have moved your body, then that is for you. And I know I've seen everything enough. I've said everything and nothing, but basically the point is you don't need to have ADHD to use the app. Anybody can benefit from it as long as the struggles that you have are these and the kind of environment that you're looking for is a positive, compassionate, kind environment where people are just trying their best, really.
Yeah, that's lovely. I was going to say that as the next question, like, what are the three main benefits that people gain? But I mean, I feel like you just touched on them there, very, very clearly. Yeah, because it can be so, what's the word I'm looking for when I'm thinking about people who are around me who've got ADHD, and I've never been tested, but definitely, I'd say I exhibit symptoms, but it can be really debilitating for people.
Yeah.
Um, And like you say, there's like sometimes it's just this little small step for someone with ADHD to experience like sort of negative effects around certain things. Even just from a point of view of being able to reconnect back into the body, that is profound. Like that is so that is like that for me is an absolute game changer because so many people, and I'll put 90% of the people. I know it's you can't really say, oh, you raise the statistics, there isn't any, but I would say the large majority of people I meet or work with at the beginning are disconnected from the felt sense, the feelings, the sensations in the body, and can't orientate themselves to the environment because of this
Yeah.
disconnection.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a concept that is difficult for people to grasp because it feels like very abstract. What does it mean to reconnect to your body? What does it mean to feel disconnected? But I think there is a layer to it that is very intuitive, that is really just about, am I tired or am I restless? Am I hungry or am I thirsty? Even just being able to answer these questions will make such a difference to your day to day that you don't even realize. And this is really what we're talking about. We're talking about feeling your body in space. We're talking about being able to respond to what it's asking you in the moment that it's asking you. And that will really impact your life a lot. I think for me, the recent month, and we talked about it, there's been a lot going on for me, and I've been through quite a bit. And one thing that I would take away from it is really slowing down and trying to tune in into what my body needed at that moment. The struggle there is that for a lot of ADHDers, there is a confusion between what your body really needs and your interpretation of it. And so a lot of
Hmm.
people say, if I were to listen to what my body needs, I would bed rot for weeks. But that's not because that's what your body needs. It's because there is a layer between the feeling and the interpretation that is broken. So the more you can put yourself in a situation where there are clear signals and you can interpret them and understand what they mean, like when you're going on a run, when you're going on a walk, or when you're breathing, sitting down and breathing or doing gentle movement, the more you connect these things and the more you start paying attention to all surrounding things, like, okay, I've just exercised. Am I hungry? What kind of food am I craving? Would it be better to eat this or that? So all of these things will slowly compound to actually help you understand what your body needs and eventually feel better.
Wow, it's what you're saying is absolutely blowing my mind because it's such a problem. Like it's so needed, and I'm being biased because I'm in an echo chamber of my own community. But I do a lot of reading, and I do a lot of research, and it's so prevalent the need for this. And I suppose what's coming up for me as you're talking is the importance. It's funny because I've actually recorded a video for social media this morning that I'll publish this week around the importance of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Now, self-awareness as a concept is like it's okay, it's simple, but it's not easy to be able to bring an awareness of like what's happening. And now you talked about breathing. I'm almost all thinking meditation to bring yourself into the present moment where you can actually in the first instance be able to observe these things because when we're so busy all the time, it's hard to like, okay, do I feel this? What's this? It's like, no, you just need to slow down. I'm wondering, is there an aspect of the app? If it's not there, it could there be in the future around taking people through like breathing,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the
meditation,
plan. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as part of the self-awareness of being able to observe oneself, of relating to the things that you're talking about being able to see these correlations. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah. That is already part of the plan. So the idea is basically
Perfect.
to make the toolbox So to make exercise a tool in a toolbox of different interventions like
Yeah.
breathing, different types of breathings, body scans, especially interoceptive body scans, um, sensory stuff and affective touch or types of sensory stimulation that feel safe for ADHDers. So things like that. The idea is basically to have an algorithm that can suggest different types of things according to whatever we know about you and whatever you tell us about you. So it's not going to be exercise only in the future. It's going to be a toolbox that is grounded in embodied cognition.
Amazing. Amazing. That's what I hope you would say. So it's becoming more holistic,
Yeah. Yeah.
more systemic.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
everything's connected. Wow,
Yeah.
that is what that's blown my mind because I can see the value very clearly beyond just exercise of those things taking place. So so who's this? I mean, I know we said who's it for, like, it's not ADHD exclusive, but is it for individuals? So is it what we call in the entrepreneurship world B2C, which is business to consumer, business to customer, or is it B2B, business to business, or is it both?
Both. So we are starting. So we went into more the B2B2C space. Right now, we have contracted with a couple of employee benefits providers and a big employee and a big student discount provider. And we are also working with organizations. So more and more, we will move towards a hybrid model where we have both access for individuals directly on the website, but also access via bespoke partners or directly for organizations.
Wow, okay. And so if someone, as we start to bring this to a close, like if someone wanted to get in touch with you from a from either a business or just as someone who's in the general public, just how would they find you? Would they go to the website? Can they download the app from the App Store? What does that look like?
So the app is a progressive web app, which means it's a website that you can bookmark on your phone. So the moment that you go to outsetwellness.com, you can simply start registration with any of the buttons, apart from the login button, because that's for already members that are already registered. But otherwise, any of the other buttons on the landing page, you can start straight away with the app.
Ah,
And we'll
cool.
give you 7 days for free, no credit card needed, nothing at all. You can just jump in, try it, see if it's for you or if you like it. If not, completely fine. We don't want to add to the ADHD tax by asking people to put their credit card details for a product that they haven't tried yet. So we've been very thoughtful about it. And in terms of organizations, they can get in touch via the website or on LinkedIn. I'm very happy for people to add me on LinkedIn. If they tell me I've listened to this podcast, I'd like to talk to you, absolutely please do so on LinkedIn. And I've given you all the links, but it's just Sonia Ponzo. My LinkedIn is very easy.
Yeah, well, I'll put all the links into the into the show notes. And I just want to build on a little bit more because I imagine that it's more than just the app. So where we're looking at, say, organizations, is it something that you offer where you go in almost like as a, you provide wraparound for like the app for the staff? So maybe you go in, do like well-being days, like you do like activations like within the corporate environment for the organization who maybe have got you as part of the employee benefits program. Is that something that you offer as well?
Yes, so definitely we do workshops, we do training. We are very happy to be flexible and work with organizations based on what they need. We
Yeah.
can go there and present the app and do an onboarding session. We can do, events with employees to get them used to the product, but also just talk about whatever we talked about today, ideas on how and strategies on how we implement better self-regulation for ADHDs in the workplace, what to watch out for, how to empower your ADHD employees, so on and so forth. So all of that is definitely something that we are very happy to work on. And even considering that there is National Inclusion Week coming up and ADHD Awareness Month, that is a particularly important time to be doing that.
Wow. Okay. I'll put all this in the show notes. Wow, this has been incredible. It's it, it's connected to my work because it's like I said about being holistic and self-awareness and being able to observe oneself and a lot of people who come in my community who have got ADHD, and if there's opportunities out there through like what you've built from someone with lived experience that can really help because it's not just around like what's in the now. It's obviously we look back in our family system and what's shaping some of this. And so I suppose one of the last questions I want to ask you is what causes ADHD? Because I look at it from maybe a family system perspective, but it's probably a big question to finish with. But What is known to be through study and research to be the causes of ADHD in the first place?
So there is a huge hereditary and genetic component. So typically the hereditary percent, so the likelihood of you developing ADHD if one of your parents has ADHD is about 80%.
Ah, okay.
So there is definitely a lot of research around genetic underpinnings. The hereditary rate of ADHD, typically if one of your parents or both your parents have ADHD, is around 80%. So, and it is a developmental disorder. So it's something, a condition, it's something that comes up typically in the developmental years, in the years of development. So it's not, it's some, I don't think I've seen many people who develop ADHD in adulthood, but again, it's not really my specialism. But in general, there is definitely factors that make it worse. So throughout, if you have ADHD, you're more prone to certain types of lifestyle. You may suffer from addiction more, and all of this contributes to potentially trauma and potentially other things that are added to exacerbating the symptomatology. When I look at, for instance, my own experience, it all it was all much worse after I started with being an entrepreneur. So after I founded my own business, not from the perspective of daily life, like I am much more fulfilled and I'm much happier because I am doing different things every day. But from the perspective of my brain, symptoms exacerbated a lot because of stress, but also because of the lack of structure. I was finally able to have my own structure, which means chaos. And I might very well thrive in chaos, but at the same time, my symptoms also thrive. So it's uh, it's a complex environment plus hereditary components, I would say.
Yeah, I see clearly what you're sharing there for sure. I see it a lot. Yeah, within the community, especially with entrepreneurs. It was consistent. Because I was running accelerator programs and I was coaching on accelerator programs, and like predominantly the people there were exhibiting like similar things. And like you say, actually like aspects of ADHD lends itself well to someone being an entrepreneur
Yeah.
and needing to be an entrepreneur because they can't work in an office 9 to 5 because it'll drive them around the bend. But then, like you say, also exacerbates the symptoms of it where there's no off switch, where there's a lot of burnout. But anyway, that's another story.
No, but it's true because obviously you are much more able to not fit yourself into someone else's schema that doesn't really work for you. It's your way of, setting up a system rather than fitting yourself in a system that doesn't work. But at the same time, if you're left to your own devices, I noticed on myself that the symptoms do, especially if there is a lot of stress, they are exacerbated. I don't know, I wouldn't be able to tell you if it is because of the lack of structure, if it is because of the stress, which one comes first. I suspect the stress is probably the biggest culprit between the two, but jury's out.
Interesting. Okay, I'll save that one for another episode. So, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. I mean, there's so much more depth we can go into, but it was enough to give people a sense and to see how Outset fits in. It's good to hear some of your story and some of the ways that people can engage. So I'll put everything in the show notes around how people can connect with you. But just before we go, what I ask everybody is like, what's one key takeaway or advice that you could offer someone who's listening to this episode now in your context?
I would say, so I was telling you earlier that recently my life's been a little bit all over the place and I've went through a few events that put everything into perspective. And I was writing a newsletter edition that just went out now. I was talking about this, and there are two things from there that I think make sense. So what happened is I had a really big health scare where I had a little brush with death, and then my cat of 13 years, that was my family member and companion, died suddenly, of causes that we still don't really know. And all of this kind of put a certain lens on my day to day and, choices and whatnot. And I think I texted you this sentence when we were on LinkedIn and we were chatting on LinkedIn, and I said, it feels like everything is urgent, but nothing really matters. And what that means really is we just go after the things that we think are important, that, deadline and the extra, work project and whatnot. But then when it comes down to it, the things that you think about are, I haven't spent enough time playing with the cat while she was still here, or I haven't spent enough time with the loved ones. And so I think at the end of that newsletter, I say to people, if what I've just been through taught me something, it is to ask myself every day, will doing this make me happier today and glad that I did it tomorrow? Because it's not just about, satisfaction in the moment. It's about, will it serve me tomorrow? And is it making me happy now? And the things that really matter, are time with loved ones, a body that serves you as long as possible so that you can spend most of your life active and able to walk and able to function. And and yeah, I think those are the most important things. And
Wow.
the impact that you make. I think the third element of that is time with people, making sure to nurture your body because you'll need it, and look around at the impact and how much value you've built. So living this earth better than we found it, at least in respect to the value that we add to it.
Yeah, thank you. Three amazing reflections. And like that, as you say, has come from a recent brush with death that can really reframe how you live in your life. It's like something I sometimes use is that when you're at a grand old age and you're sitting in your big armchair or whatever you are, and you look back on your life, that there's no regrets, and you feel like that you're moving on with a full life, that you did everything you possibly could, and you said yes to life. So yeah, thank you, Sonia.
Of course.
There's been an incredible conversation, and maybe there'll be another one at some point, as Outset starts to grow and develop even more. But thank you for sharing your story about Outset, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you again. Take care.
Thank you.